Uh, All right, let us begin episode 4 of our weekly Tanya class. And we're talking about what a Beinoni is. And we've established that a Beinoni is not someone who has half sins and half merits. As the name might imply, Beinoni means an intermediary person or an intermediate person, kind of neither here nor there. So one could think that it's somebody who doesn't have mostly merits and doesn't have mostly sins, but it's just an intermediate person who has half and half. So the Alter Rebbe establishes for a couple of reasons why that can't be the case. Number one, because we have a great rabbi by the name Rabbah from the Talmud, who mistakenly called himself a Beinoni. Now, granted, even though it turns out he wasn't even a Beinoni, but the very fact that he could even mistakenly call himself a Beinoni indicates that a Beinoni is not someone who's half and half. Because Rabbah, as humble as he may be, he's not under the delusion that he's sinning half the time. So that certainly can be the case. And another reason why a Beinoni can't be someone who does half sins and half merits is because the moment someone commits even one sin, that person is called a Rasha. And if that same person then does proper teshuva, returns to Hashem, then they're called a tzaddik. So 1 second, then where does Beinoni fall into the picture? We don't know yet, but at least we know that it's not someone who commits sins. Certainly not half sins. Now, to that last point about somebody being called a Rasha and then shortly thereafter being called a tzaddik, it's entirely possible. In fact, in the one area of Jewish law where words matter immensely is in the area of marriage and divorce, because both of those areas require a verbal or a written declaration of words, and those words matter very much. And so when it comes to kiddushin, to marriage, if a person says, I am betrothing you, I am marrying you, on condition that I am a tzaddik, even though that person might be a gang rapist or the worst person possible, but he's still the marriage needs to be considered a proper marriage, and really they should you should try to do it more properly and actually do it without any conditions, or if they don't want to stay married, to go through a proper divorce. But there's certainly reason to believe that it's a proper marriage. Why? Because perhaps this person, as terrible as he may be and as much of a record as he has of being a bad person, a Rasha, maybe just now at this moment he thought about doing tshuva, and not just thought about, but in his heart really did tshuva. Because if you think about it, the essence of tshuva is really something in the heart. Now, hopefully, if it's a genuine tshuva, you'll see it reflect over time in their behavior as well. But the essence of tshuva is something that takes place in the heart and takes place in an instant. So maybe that happened while he was saying, I am betrothing you on condition that I'm a tzaddik. Anyways, why are we mentioning about tshuva and this and that? It's only to point out that a Beinoni is not someone who has half sins. Now, to take this point even further, that someone who does even one sin is called a Rasha, the Alter Rebbe goes through different examples of singular sins, or what someone may regard as minor sins. So once again, I'm going to post the link to the Tanya class. It won't take 5 minutes like I did last time to get to it, but I'll post it right now in the chat. And you can scroll down to where it says, Va'afilu ha'ever. It's about a little more than a third down the page, by the words after the brackets, even he who violates a minor prohibition of the rabbis. Va'afilu ha'ever al isur kal shel divrei seifrim. So the Alter Rebbe continues, "Va'afilu ha'ever al isur kal shel divrei seifrim," and even someone who violates a light prohibition of the words of the rabbis. In other words, we're not just talking about a biblical violation, but we're talking about a rabbinical violation. So let's say, for example, one of the rabbinical mitzvahs is
Hanukkah.
Hanukkah, yeah. So he says, you know what, it's the 5th night of Hanukkah, but I like even numbers, and I'm only going to light 4 candles on my menorah tonight. Despite, I have plenty of candles, but I like even numbers, and I'm not going to follow the rabbinical requirement to have 5 candles on my menorah tonight, right? So that's a I don't know if it's a minor violation, but it's certainly a violation of a rabbinical nature. Or when it comes to washing nagelwasser, washing your hands before bread and things like that, those are rabbinical requirements, right? So somebody might say, well, even though I'm supposed to wash all the way until after the wrist, I'm only going to wash a half an inch before the wrist, right? Or whatever, I'm not so careful that it reaches the bottom of my hand. By the way, that's one area where if you're pouring normally, it might not reach the bottom of your hand. That's why it's always recommended to twist your hand as you're pouring the water. So while you're pouring it, you kind of twist the hand underneath so it gets to all sides. Anyways, but if somebody violates that, Mikre Rasha, he's called a Rasha. As it says, Kidiisa beperik beis Yevamot, says it's brought in chapter 2 of the Talmud Tractate Yevamot on page 20. They're discussing what's called a Rasha, what's not called a Rasha, and Rava says over there that certainly somebody who doesn't fulfill the words of our sages, the commandments of our sages, would that person not be called a Rasha? Of course he is. And the Alter Rebbe says, Uveperakama Denida, in chapter 1 of Tractate Nida, also mentions the same idea. So you have to understand, somebody who didn't pour the water on his hand before bread fully, he only did it 98%, is called a Rasha. So then what's a Beinoni, right? This is our big question over here. The Alter Rebbe continues, even somebody who has the ability to forewarn or to rebuke somebody and does not do so, Nikra Rasha, he's called a Rasha. Now this is brought by Perek Vav to Shavuos in chapter 6 of Tractate Shavuot. So in other words, over here we're talking about not somebody who does a sin on his own. But we're talking about somebody who by himself didn't do an act of a sin, didn't do an Aveira. But he had the ability to rebuke somebody else who is doing an Aveira, who is violating a principle, a mitzvah of the Torah, and he stood by idly and didn't rebuke them. So it's wrong, but it's not his own misdeed, it's somebody else's misdeed. But even then, he is called a Rasha. Now, I should clarify something very important. We shouldn't suddenly become a bunch of zealots going around and rebuking everyone who we see doing things wrong. Yes, thank God we are blessed to have the Torah that guides us in every respect of our lives. You can't turn your head or tie your shoe without listening to something from the Torah and obeying another law. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that every single opportunity that you see someone doing something wrong is an opportunity to rebuke them. Obviously, we're talking about a rebuke that's an acceptable rebuke. What's called be'ofen hamiskabel, in a way that is well received. As we know, it says that words that that come from the heart, come forth from the heart, will enter the heart. And if you see that your words are not entering somebody else's heart, you need to look deeper inside yourself and ask yourself, is this really coming from my heart? Is this coming out of love, Or is this coming out of some dogmatic persona that I'm giving off, or perhaps even hatred and disdain that I might have for this other person? And if that's the case, then you need to check yourself and work on your own ability to love others. But assuming that it's somebody you do love, and you harbor no resentment in your heart towards them, and they love you too, and they're willing to hear your message, and in your presence they do something that is not okay, then you have an obligation to step up and to speak up and say something about it. And not just to say, well, that's that person. So the reference that the Alter Rebbe makes to Tractate Shavuos is, it's talking about people who don't forewarn others who are doing sins. The people who stood idly by are called Rishaim. The Gemara is discussing, the Talmud is discussing the punishment for someone who does not rebuke someone doing something wrong. And the Talmud distinguishes between family members of the sinner, or the rest of Israel, the rest of the Jewish people who didn't rebuke the sinner. And the Gemara asks, what's the difference between the Rishayim of his family or the Rishayim of the rest of the Jewish people? In other words, what's the severity of standing idly by as a family member, or what's the severity of standing idly by as a fellow Jew? But both of them, in the verbiage of the Gemara, are called Rishayim. So we see that somebody who stands idly by and does not take the opportunity to forewarn somebody, to bring to someone's attention that what they're doing is wrong, is called a rasha. So again, here we have further proof that our idea of a Beinani being somebody who's half sins and half merits can't be true. Because even just losing an opportunity to rebuke somebody makes you into a rasha. Again, a valid opportunity to rebuke somebody. And then the Alter Rebbe goes even further. V'kol shekain v'kal v'chaimer. And certainly, and even more so, b'mevatel eizeh mitzvah saseh she'efshar le'lekayma. If you miss out on an opportunity to do a positive commandment, so what's an example of a positive commandment that one may possibly neglect? Not that you may as in you're allowed to, but it's possible that someone might neglect. Someone who has an opportunity to study Torah and does not study Torah. And by the way, today is a perfect example for that. Because even people who, for the most part of their lives, for the most part of their weekdays, during waking hours, the majority of that is spent at a job, earning a living, which is allowed, and not just allowed, but sanctioned by the Torah. But a day like today, on December 25th, most people are not working. So a Jew who's not working on December 25th, what do you have to do? Learn Torah. What else are you supposed to do? So somebody who has the opportunity to learn Torah, but does not learn Torah, She'alav Darshu Razal, regarding this person, our sages tell us, Kidavar Hashem Baza. It says in Tractate Sanhedrin that this person disgraces the name of a God. Tikares, his soul shall be cut off. Very harsh terms that are used for such a person. In other words, even somebody who has to earn a living and the Torah that he learns is the minority of the time, the permission that's granted for him to not learn Torah is only in regards to doing what's necessary to make a living. But not just to waste his time with idle speak or other frivolous matters that are not important to earning a living. So any free moment a person has, as long as they're not involved in earning a living, they have to learn Torah. Now, granted, this is one of the more difficult mitzvahs to fulfill, because essentially it means that every waking moment you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, and either you're doing that, or who knows. So one solution is you can have a Torah radio playing in your kitchen constantly, 24/6, not on Shabbos, of course, but the rest of the week. So, you know, maybe it's set as an alarm clock. So you wake up to it, and constantly you're listening to classes on Torah. So you're washing your dishes, you're doing this, you're doing that. Whatever it is you're involved in, you're constantly learning Torah. Or maybe, for example, you might be driving in your car, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to tune in on Zoom to a Tanya class. Not that I'm referring to anybody specific or anything.
Of course not.
No. So that's an example of doing the right thing, of learning Torah. Of course, keeping your eyes on the road. But this idea of learning Torah at every free moment is very, very difficult to observe. Now, to sum this all up, if the title of a Rasha is associated with someone who violates even a rabbinical commandment, like hand washing, or how many candles you put on the menorah, or the lack of rebuking somebody, how much more so if you are violating an obligation of the Torah, even though you didn't actually do anything wrong. You didn't actually go out there and eat something non-kosher. You didn't go and steal from anybody. You didn't do an act that is wrong. All you did was you sat on your couch. Is that a sin? So in a way, yes, because you're neglecting Torah. Because you have an opportunity to learn Torah and you're neglecting it. So that neglect is considered a sin. And it's even a greater sin than a rabbinical sin. Why? Because the rabbinical sin is a rabbinical sin. But this neglect to learn Torah is a biblical sin. Or it's biblical neglect. Now, why does he give the example of hold on. Upshita, the Alter Rebbe continues, Upshita, the Mikre Rasha, Tfeima Ever Isad Rabbanan. And it's obvious that someone who violates a biblical or neglects a biblical obligation is more of a Rasha than someone who violates a rabbinical prohibition. So Ve'im Kain, the Alter Rebbe says, and therefore, given all the above, given the fact that Rabbah mistakenly called himself a Beinoni, and given the fact that, you know, a Rasha is somebody who does even one sin, and what kind of sin? It could be a rabbinical sin. It could be the opportunity to rebuke somebody. It could be neglecting Torah study. But given the fact that such a person is called a Rasha, so then what's a Beinoni? So the Alter Rebbe says, if so, al karchach habeinani ein by afilu avayin bitul Torah. You must say that a Beinoni is someone who does not even have the sin of neglecting Torah study. Now, one second. Why are we saying even neglecting Torah study? We just said it's like the worst thing in the world. We said that you're disgracing the name of God. Your soul will be cut off. Harsh terms. So, two things could be true at once. On the one hand, yes, it's very harsh. It's very detrimental to neglect Torah study. But at the same time, we all understand that to hold up to that standard is very difficult, and it's virtually impossible. in fact, the Talmud tells us in Gemara Brachas that if somebody is experiencing difficulty, challenges in their life, they should be mefashbish b'maisav. They should search their deeds. They should do some introspection, soul searching, as we call it in today's terminology, and figure out where have they gone wrong. Now, what happens if he searched and he didn't find? So then you can always rely on neglect of Torah study, meaning rely on it as a probable cause for anything and everything, because no doubt every person has this in their in their resume, in the negative sense, right? Meaning it's impossible or virtually impossible for somebody to literally go all their lives without ever neglecting Torah study. Because it literally means that if you're, I don't know, boarding an airplane and you're not reciting words of Torah in that time because you're checking the times and you're curious or whatever, so that could also be neglect of Torah study. I don't know, going on vacation and putting your feet up at the beach. That's also neglect of Torah study. I mean, you could go on and on. So even such a person, and that's why we're saying even such a person, because even though it's the easiest sin to commit or the easiest neglect to commit, that wouldn't allow you to be a Beinani. So a Beinani is someone who doesn't even do that. A Beinani is someone who not only does not ever do the hand washing wrong, not only makes sure to rebuke all those who will be accepting to their rebuke, not only do they never neglect a moment to study Torah, they never violate any of the commandments. Oh, so now I have a better understanding. Now I understand that a Beinani is a very lofty level. A Beinani is a very special person. Because a Beinani is somebody who is above the level of a Rasha. And we just gave examples of somebody who's a Rasha in the most minute deficiencies in their observance of Torah and mitzvahs, right? So if those people are called a Rasha, a Beinani is not that. So the Alter Rebbe answers his earlier question of how could Rabbah mistakenly think he's a Beinani? So the Alter Rebbe says, Umishum hachi, and it's for this reason that Rabbah ba'atzmai lo mashuhu Beinani, that Rabbah mistakenly thought of himself as a Beinani. As the Alter Rebbe will clarify, Rabbah not only was a Beinani, he was actually a tzaddik. So not only is a Beinani not half and half, but a Beinani and certainly a tzaddik has zero sins, not even the sin of neglect of Torah study. And now we can understand why Rabbah called himself a Beinani, even though he truthfully was a tzaddik. And he never stopped learning Torah. In other words, he never neglected Torah study. He never violated that thing. Which even a Beinani has to have that requirement of not violating neglect of Torah study. From this, we understand that there's not much of a difference between a tzaddik and a Beinani. Because the advantage of a tzaddik over a Beinani is not in regards to practice, in what they actually do. Because both a tzaddik and a Beinani do not violate any sins. They do not neglect Torah study. Not the tzaddik and not the Beinani. So what's the difference between a tzaddik and a Beinani? Both of them are perfect people. They never do anything wrong. So the difference between a tzaddik and a Beinani is in something deeper that's inside of them, as will be explained going further. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for episode 5, and that'll be on Monday, January 1st, 2024. Good way to start the new solar year. So see you all soon, and have a happy Monday.